hand over now to the person in charge of Textile Exchange, star of The True Cost, Lorraine Pepper.
Thank you, Simon. Powerful story. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And I'm just going to set the stage a little bit. We're going to be talking about seed. And we've got a great group of folks here. And what I wanted, what our goal and our vision is, and I think there's a lot of compatibility across the board, that intentions are in the right place. People are wanting to create solutions for farmers, and we may have different approaches to do that. So I'm just going to tell you right now, this is not a debate about the pros and cons of GMO. That is going on in other places, outside this room, maybe in the back of this room, but it's not going to be happening on this stage. The conversation today is about the realities of organic is here. It's been here for thousands of years, and it is here to stay, and we're only going to expand and grow because we have market support. We've got the formula right. We're creating the best practices. We're addressing the problems in the business model, and consumers want a choice. Well, I'm here to tell you that farmers want a choice too. We want to be able to have the right to farm the way we want to farm in a way that respects the soil and the land. And part of that choice as an organic farmer is non-GMO seed. That's not to say that my neighbors and counterparts are doing their same philosophically. They believe they're doing the right thing in using GMO technology in order to feed the world. So we respectfully disagree. And that's what I'm looking for here right now, is we are going to respectfully disagree on people's opinions around GMOs today. The conversation then is about how we coexist, because my neighbors are GMO farmers, and we go to school together, we go to church together, we live together. It's a reality. But there are problems. And so it is, the conversation about how we coexist respectfully in a way that allows farmers to have a choice, communities to have a choice, and consumers to have a choice. So the three questions I'm going to be asking today is, I've got a great group panel. They're going to introduce themselves. And then the first question is, what does coexistence, successful, respectful coexistence, look like to you? And then what needs to happen to create that reality? And then do you have any examples of how that's happening in other communities or with other crops? So Michael, if you'll get the extra mic there, and don't forget to speak a little slower, which shouldn't be a problem, you're from North Carolina.
Generally, we ask for a little extra time.
Yeah.
Because we do talk slower.
Yes, that happens in the Deep South. We'll respect that a little bit. So tell us who you are, what you've done, and I will just say, because he probably won't say it, he's one of the grandfathers of agriculture for organic in the United States, was a part of the enabling legislation that came along in the 1980s, and I won't tell you how long we've known each other, but thank you, Michael, so much for being here. So tell us a little bit about your work, and then if you need me to reiterate the questions, don't forget to hold the mic close, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm really enjoying my time. I'm honored to be here. I think I got into this line of work innocently enough. I was farming organically on a large scale in the 1970s, and got this publication from a small nonprofit in North Carolina. It was a seed directory. And if you can imagine, there was a time when there were so many seed companies that you needed a directory. And they said, hey, something is going on here. It looks like mom and pop seed companies are being bought up by chemical companies. And they're also buying up startup GMO companies. Something is going on. It looks like a major change. And I thought, well, gee, that could be a very big deal. Maybe I'll just go work on that, get that fixed, and get right back to farming. So here we are 30 years later. We've been in this conversation since the very beginning of the technology. I work for a nonprofit, the Rural Advancement Foundation International. We trace our roots back to the 1930s in the U.S. and in the global South and the American South, with the issues of farmers and sharecroppers. And so we're really focused on equity and justice and sustainability in agriculture. That's really our mission. And so we work on the ground directly with farmers. We work on policy at the local level, at the federal level, at the UN level. And we also work with the marketplace, because we think all three of those are essential to work in synergy in order to make paradigm shifts. You can't just do it in the marketplace, you can't just do it with a policy, and you can't just do it with the right practice. It takes all three. That's how we got here in organic, was putting those three together. And I think that's what we have to do again if we're looking at these kinds of challenges in agriculture.
Agreed. So what do you think coexistence looks like?
Well, it's not what we have now. We've had many conversations with many meaningful people around this topic for a long time. And the piece that's missing, and I'll use a story from my grandfather. He gave me a lot of advice. One was to move east of the Mississippi to where it rains. I was from West Texas, so he said, go east, young man. So I did. He also said that good fences make good neighbors, and that your fences should be hog tight and bull strong and horse high. Now, I'll admit my fences don't look that way, but the analogy plays here, that the organic community is doing everything we know to do to protect ourselves from unwanted pesticide and GMO drift. We put buffers around our farms. We lose acres that could be in sales. We plant later to avoid the pollen window. We test. We do all these things, and we may still get contaminated by no fault of our own, and have to turn that product back over to the conventional market and only take a conventional price. A big loss, real harm. And what I think coexistence would look like is more of a shared responsibility on both sides of the fence. I think that is where our work together is to be, is that if my sheep get out and eat my neighbor's corn, I'm responsible. I have to make it right.
Yep.
In this case, it's a little more tricky because my neighbor actually doesn't own this technology. They're merely renting it from a patent holder in some other place. So our conversation mostly is with the patent holder. That's where we're wanting to have the shared responsibility, not with the renter. I don't think the responsibility should be placed there. I think it needs to be with the owner of the technology in a rational, full-cost, ethical world. We would step up to the plate for whatever we do is harm and make it right. And I think that is our challenge, is to how to hold that accountability in a way that's meaningful.
So shared responsibilities, shared stewardship.
Yes.
Why don't you pass the mic to the left? Jane, tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Jane Deaver. I'm a cotton breeder with Texas A&M AgriLife Research in Lubbock, Texas. And one of the reasons I'm very passionate about being back in the public breeding sector is the vision that Lorraine laid out about every farmer having the right to farm the way they choose goes directly into being able to actually access and have those inputs. Texas A&M happens to be the public land grant university that is in partnership with the USDA National Cotton Germplasm Collection. And our genetic resources, therefore our seed, should be acquired, collected, maintained, characterized, utilized in a manner that to have the best quality and the type of seed for every farmer for their particular farming operations. Being involved with this group makes me understand how sometimes delicate that balance is. It's not just a farmer decides, I want to farm this way and have more or a sustainable, healthy soil. This is the way I choose to farm. It also involves whether there's a market for that product and there's a market that respects those choices. So that's really, really interesting. On the other hand, on the input, that's the output side. On the input side, if someone wants to farm not either non-GMO or by extension organic, and they don't have access to seed, what that looked like for me is if the seed companies, which are now chemical companies, are not going to provide that seed that is required for that type of operation. We should go back to a revitalized public sector and try to build that with the farmers. And I thought, gee, that's easy. That's what I'll do. And as far as for organic farming, I've always told if it were easy, everybody would do it. It's difficult, and this venture has proven to be difficult as well, but worthy. And since I'm from West Texas too, I can't believe a native West Texan told a sheep story. I'm going to tell a cow story that has driven my understanding of how coexistence maybe should derive and what direction it should be going. Little less than 20 years ago, we've had transgenic cotton in the United States for 20 years now. And as we started dealing with this issue, maybe it was around 1998, and it was a long-time, well-respected cotton geneticist who happened to pass away last year, so I'm going to go ahead and tell his story. In a big meeting we were, and he said, across the table from some of the GM providers or technology providers, well, if your prize bull gets out of the fence and gets on my cow, whose fault is that? And as this has transpired, it's a lot more complicated than that. Your prize bull maybe has a very special genetic makeup that makes the beef really, really great. So good that you had to have it approved and then patented. But my cows are dairy cows, and they provide for my family and maybe our community. And when your bull gets on my cow, and I don't really care about the beef genetics because I'm a vegetarian, but it doesn't make the cow better. You know who owns that cow? And oh, by the way, it was only one of my cows, and nobody wants anything from any milk from any of my cows anymore. But one of the biggest issues for me is, and the dairy farmer says, "You want me to build a fence?"
Right.
And so there was a lot of the issues that we've been grappling with in coexistence. But I was really, really touched this morning by the panel when we talked about the big efficiency world and transitioning to smaller worlds. And that is going to happen as we understand what the limits of this technology are. But transition and change, in this case, cannot happen without coexistence being in there in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. It is a necessary component.
Thank you. Valley, tell us, what is your vision of coexistence?
When Mike actually shared his vision of coexistence and the underlying issues, I thought I don't have to say something because he really captured very well what's also going on the ground in Burkina Faso. But the other thing I'll add is that you have to put a face. We have been talking about small farmers, and we have to put a face on that small farmer, who he is, what he is doing, and what are the means at his disposal to do what he is doing. And I'm not going to go there without saying that we are doing this work with the government in Burkina, the National Research Institute, Agriculture and Environmental Research Institute, and we are doing it with Dr. Dever, Jane Dever, who's helping us to build a sustainable seed system to actually be able to provide enough seed for the farmers to continue, enough organic seed to continue to grow the crop they like to grow and the way they like to grow it. And I think it all comes down to freedom of choice for the farmers to grow what they want to grow. And the system, like Mike described it, the system trying to strip off that ability of the farmers, that potential to actually grow what they want to grow. And in saying that, I mean, when we are growing, to just put some figures, kind of put into perspective, last year, we lost 5% of the farms because we don't have the possibility to delay sowing because we have a window. It's all rain-fed. We have a short window. Because of climate change, or thanks to climate change, rainy season is being constructed. We used to have 4 or 5 months. Now we have 2.5 months, so we can't wait. We have to sow. And once we sow, our cotton, or once they sow it, I don't do it directly. So once they sow it, here comes the GM cotton right nearby the farm. And if there is not 50 meters distance between those two farms, then despite all the efforts and everything you have put in, you'll lose that part of your production. And last year it was 5% of the production. And that's the scene, what we are able to see, look, and say, okay, this is definitely a problem already. And then what we have will not be able to see, because we have stringent rules. We have to, after we harvest, send the samples in France, because we don't have the labs to do the analysis, quantify for each lot, 200, 250 lots of cotton, what is the level of contamination, GM contamination, before we get the certification. And last year, after we did that, we lost 22% of the production. And who's losing that? A woman, 18 years old, or 65 years old, who has probably half an acre, and all her livelihood is based on those half an acre. And despite what was said in the last panel, the tea bagger, can we propose something else? Can he do something else? This woman doesn't have a choice, because she doesn't have capacities or the finance to actually do something else. Without that livelihood, she would be left out of the economic system that we built. So she doesn't have anything else, and she is losing. We are making her lose that money. And she has average 6 kids, and she has to send them to school. She has to use her money, 60% of that revenue, to send them to school. And then once she that's part of her revenue is lost, who's responsible?
Right.
Yeah, that's my...
It is a challenge.
Yeah.
And that is one of the challenges of the current system of coexistence without appropriate boundaries, without appropriate stewardship. So Ashish, why don't you tell us what your vision is, who you are, where you're from, et cetera, as well as, what does your vision of coexistence look like?
Okay. Good morning and namaste. I'm Ashish. I work for an NGO in India called Action for Social Advancement. We are about 2 decades old organization. We mainly work in water, sustainable agriculture, and organizing farmers to connect with the value chain. So these are our work. The last 25 years I've been doing this. So I'm largely a person who is involved in the field, and my experience broadly comes from my field work. Having said that, I just wanted to develop a little bit of context, because I have been here since the last 3 days. This is my 3rd day. I understand that there is a context is a bit of missing in the entire discussions, and I was inspired by this morning quotations from the Albert Einstein that we asking the right question. So to do that. Look, if you look at this global scenario as well as India, it is actually the world of smallholders. People who are the farmers less than 2 hectares. 85% of the global farms, of the 525 million farms that we have, 85% of them are actually the smallholders. And they sustain about 2.2 billion people for their livelihoods, right? If you look at India, in the same correlation, it is about 85% of the India's farmers are small farms, which is about 140 million farming families, okay? And they largely into food production, but they also contribute a big chunk, food crop and other important crops, for the marketable surplus, right? Now, we may actually, look at them from a lens of like the commodity that we're dealing with, where here we're discussing cotton, but not necessarily the farmers are only doing cotton. A small farmer in India would be dealing with at least 6 crops in a cycle of 1 year with 2 cropping seasons. It is our problem that we only have organized ourselves through a commodity, but probably we are not going to solve their issue or sustainable farming through that lens. We need to think differently. Okay, so that's the context I wanted to bring in here and say that in that context, if we are discussing and trying to understand the coexistence in my understanding is good thing to happen. It should be there, because what we might consider today as a bad thing, future might discover it as a right thing to do. So that's a bit of a philosophical thing that I'm saying, but for the coexistence to happen, it should be a level playing field. But today, unfortunately, for the organic farmers or the people, the natural farming, that level playing field is not there, right? I mean, we have been talking about these fences and all, but we are trying to solve these level playing field issues through more of a kind of, voluntarism. But I think that this issue to be sorted out through the regulatory mechanisms to some extent, because things are going out of the hand, and I mean, before we face a crisis, there is no point of return. I think the regulation has to come, and how that regulation is going to take a shape, it is basically a national issues, and we need to see that there are global bodies like WTO or G20 or G7 or those kind of organizations that take up such issues and start talking about it. And we need to. This is a much bigger agenda that we need to deal with, and therefore small discussions like this should contribute to that bigger discussions and try to make it a global agenda. That's what is my thinking of coexistence.
Coexistence,
We have to
as
create
well
an
as
enabling environment
what
for
needs to happen.
coexistence.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Arun. I think we've all had some awareness of what some of the issues are, so I'd like you to really focus on what do you think needs to happen to create this resilient, equitable, more sustainable, level playing field, so to speak, of freedom for choice for farmers and consumers.
Yeah, my name is Arun Ambadipudi, and I represent an organization in India, a farmers organization in India called Chetna Organic. We not just grow cotton, we also produce, like Ashish said, a host of other crops. I'm actually in the wrong seat because I replaced Dr. Patil, who has a different, response to coexistence compared to what I have, or a different take on coexistence. So you said that how do we respectfully and successfully coexist? From where Ashish has left, saying we have level playing field. In a smallholder situation in India, for example, or in Africa, is there a real level playing field is the question for coexistence. To coexistence is successful coexistence. How can there be a successful coexistence when I find that my cotton or my farmer's cotton is not entering into the organic markets because there has been a genetic contamination for reasons that I am not at fault? It could be because of drift, something else. How can there be a successful coexistence when a honey farmer in India who has got nothing to do with cotton has found his honey to be blocked in the export zones recently because of and GM-free certificates being asked? So there is no level playing field. And when we talk about fencing, for example, yes, fencing in large countries, you can have, when you have 5,000 hectares, you can still have some fencing. But even you have vertical fencings, but what about aerial sprayings, right? And in a smallholder situation, it's even more difficult because two brothers, one might be doing organic cotton, the other might be doing BT cotton. But when they come back after harvest, they store in the same house. So can you fence that thing? And fencing is not about just putting a vertical barrier, but
metaphor.
it's also about creating a divide between two brothers. So that's more of a philosophical and a political issue that we need to deal with. From a respectful coexistence, I don't know if we can respectfully, if violence and peace can respectfully coexist. And there are, I just want to tell you this interesting thing about, for decades, NGOs and governments and political activists have been talking about GMOs and, taking up campaigns. But what nature did last year in India, it just ensured that whitefly devastated the crops in Haryana and Punjab. And this year you had 70,000 hectares under Desi cotton, that is the native to India breed cotton. So it's the power of nature. In spite of all the efforts we put, and nature can balance out at the end of the day. And but having said that, efforts have to be made around breeding, genetic breeding around, I would say, around local varieties and around local varieties. And for that, I think working with the governments and regulatory bodies are important, because without the government, it's so difficult. So there are efforts happening, I would say, but coexistence in a smallholder system might be a bit difficult.
Delicate even where I farm, quite frankly. So it's difficult to build those fences, and when it's an analogy, it's a metaphor. But I think in the time that we have left, I can't quite see the clock now through the bottle, but okay. All right, so in the 6 minutes we have left, according to, I just want to come back to when we talk about seed breeding. Can people that are involved in some, I know we've got other people that are involved in some non-GMO seed breeding initiatives and activities, can you raise your hand? So there are those kinds of things happening, which is refreshing, but it's not enough, maybe, and definitely under-resourced. So I do feel like there has to be that greater activity around going back to the grassroots to be able to breed seeds for the regions, because all the different climate change, soil change, different kinds of cotton seeds need to be developed based upon the needs of the climate and the area it's grown. So that's certainly one area, so that public sector breeding. Michael, you've also been a part of, you want to pass the mic down to Michael? You've also been a part of some of the legislation and the thought starters of what needs to happen at a legislative level, and that is an area where we as a community have not traditionally been involved. So I think it is taking our voice and our community to another level. We need to find more resources for the seed breeding, number 1 and 2, and come back into that. But we're going to have to take a more proactive role when it comes to legislation advocacy. So, Michael, why don't you share a little bit about what the plans are, perhaps, for DC, some things that are coming up, and of course, we realize there's other geographic areas where this needs to be replicated, and there are some things happening in India. So let's talk about that level of engagement of what we need to do, what the key messages might be.
Right. I mean, I think that I agree with all that I've heard here in terms of the fact that we don't have parity in terms of access, in terms of resources, and one way that we build that equity and fairness is by finding our voice and organizing ourselves broadly, because we tend to be stovepiped by commodity, by region, by country, when in fact we all have this common agenda and this common challenge that we need to unite around. And I think when you have industry and farmers and nonprofits and supply chain actors all saying the same thing, that's a very powerful thing, especially to a member of Parliament or the Congress.
So it's finding that common voice?
Yeah, so I think we have to find that voice, because, if you go into an office of a member of Congress and they first say, well, are you in my district? And then they say, what do you do? And then they figure out your certain percentage of their constituency, and they'll give you about that much time based on your percentage. But if you show up and you're across the board in terms of business, farmer, NGO, faith community, whatever, then they go,
Oops.
oh, I guess I really have to pay attention. I really have to listen to this. So I think uniting our message so that we are multi-sector and we're saying the same thing is quite critical. If you take the U.S. context, since I'm excited that this will be hosted in Washington next year, it requires us to have a government, so that's still a little iffy. But let's assume we'll have a government and there's some people to talk to, and it's also the cycle in the U.S. where every 5 years we rewrite our farm legislation. So all of our legislation, and in a new administration, they only have 2 years to get something done, and then it'll all kind of go to hell. So this is the 2-year window. It's the beginning of a farm bill, a united front with not just the textile community and the business community, but with other parts of the organic and non-GMO community. That is a real strategic opportunity for us. And if we could make some headway in the U.S., it can be a model for other places. I mean, many other places have chose not to go this route, and they're better for it. But we have 3 or 4 countries, maybe 5 countries that have heavily invested in this technology, and it is imbalanced. This is a chance to set that balance again, to realign, and I think it is an opportunity for us, and we should see it as our moment in time.
Absolutely. Ashish, you wanted to say a couple things about
Yeah,
what's going on in India
That's right. I mean,
specifically?
as you rightly said, that in a democratic setup, I mean, what best you can do, you can actually create a voice for yourselves, and then represent that voice to the government to work for you, and that's probably the right way to work in a democratic setup. So, in Madhya Pradesh, the central India, where we are working for the cotton farmers, organic cotton farmers, and we are a group of about 10, 12 field partners. We have grouped ourselves as a secretariat called Organic and Fair Trade Cotton Secretariat. So through that group, when we started discussing about the organic cotton seeds and contamination issues, so we approached the government, and then we invited the state agriculture universities. In India, state-level agriculture issues are dealt by the agriculture universities, and then there is a central level, federal level council that's called Indian Council for Agriculture Research. So the state agriculture universities, they were invited, the state government, and they were invited, and we discussed about this issue. So as a result of it, what came out is that, the availability of non-GMO seed is an issue, and whatever non-GMO seeds are available, there is contamination issues. There is not much of private sector investment is happening, as because the sector is too small for the private to attract the private investment. Therefore, government thought it is their responsibility, because there's a number of thousands of farmers.
Wonderful.
So they just, as a response to that, they passed a resolution, a kind of a government order, asked the agriculture university to start breeding program, the non-GMO seeds. And I'm happy to tell you that from this season it has started. 2 universities have started seed breeding program, non-GMO, under their own control, which basically will ensure that contamination is almost zero, because under their own control that they will start doing. They have started already doing it. So the point I'm trying to make, that in a democracy, if you can just give a voice to this voiceless community of small farmers or the organic farmers, and there are ways out to do things.
Agreed. I would just, in closing, say that this is not a cotton issue. It's a bigger issue than that. It's not only an organic food issue, an organic production system. This is, what I alluded to yesterday a little bit. It is about that freedom, a freedom of choice for farmers and consumers and everyone in between, to be able to support their beliefs, their values, and that ability. So I think it's definitely worth spending some time and energy. So I know that all of you in this room care passionately about this as well. and want to be a part of whatever that voice becomes. So stay tuned, stay posted, and we will definitely be doing what we can to encourage and network those involved in seed breeding programs to do it more information sharing, because we do have a variety of different initiatives going on, but there needs to be that. We want to encourage the individual action at the various universities and places, but that all needs to roll up into collective action and a unified voice. So appreciate your attention. Thank you so much for your comments and sharing your views on how we work with coexistence and make it stronger. You want to say one closing thing?
No, I just, because you've talked about a cow story, I just want to end with a goat story. In India, 3 years ago, there was a big issue about goats, feeding on Bt cotton. Plants were dying, so it was a news. So one of the research centers wanted to do force feeding of goats in the research center, and trying to see if the goats were really dying. And but what happened? After a few days, they realized that the goats were jumping the fence and running to eat non-GM, non-Bt cotton leaves. So goats don't want to coexist.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, everybody. Another round of applause for our panel here.